again. This is Ray Trevino, and you are watching The Crude Truth.
In 1901, at Spindletop Hill near Beaumont, the future of Texas changed dramatically as, like a fountain of fortune, thousands of barrels of oil burst from the earth towards the sky. Soon, Detroit would be cranking out Model Ts by the millions, and America was on the move, thanks to the black gold being produced in Texas. Now, more than a century later, the vehicles are different, but nothing else has truly changed. Sure, there may be many other alternative energy sources like wind and solar and electric. But let's be honest, America depends on oil and entrepreneurs, and if the USA is truly going to be independent, it has to know the crude truth.
Well, my guest today is somebody that's just truly exciting to have on the show. He's a guy, he is internationally known. He writes for Shell Magazine, an editor there. He also writes for Forbes. But if you ask his granddaughters, he's probably the world's greatest grandpa. I have on today David Blackmon. David, how are you?
Thanks. That's the best compliment anyone could pay me.
Well, how are you doing today?
I'm great. It's a nice chilly day here in Fort Worth.
It is. You would think we're still in February, right?
I know.
Well, tell me, David, you've been in the industry now for over 40 years.
Yeah.
So many people follow you. They listen to you. I mean, what was it? What about that 40 years that you have seen and done in a little bit?
Gosh, that's the good thing about the one good thing about getting old is you gain experience and you learn things and you have perspective. And so yeah, I've been around. My first job in the industry was in 1976 and 77, those summers when I was in college. My dad made me take a job as a welder's helper on a pipeline construction crew. And I grew up in Beeville, and this company was based out of there. So I spent those 2 summers. The first summer, we laid a 30-mile pipeline from a little town called Pettus over to Three Rivers to what was then the Texaco refinery in Three Rivers, Texas. And then the second summer, we worked on the Del Monte Farms, the vegetable canning company. Their farms are right outside of Crystal City in Carrizo Springs, Texas. So it was hot, nasty work, and God bless my father for doing that, because that's what convinced me to finish college, because I knew I wasn't cut out for that, right? So so I've been in the industry since '79. Went to work for Coastal States right after right before the passage of the windfall profit tax, of all things, and became a specialist in that for the first 5 years of my career. I was an accountant. I had a degree in accounting, and I worked for Tesoro Petroleum and a company out of Beeville called Hughes & Hughes, an independent producer. And in '87 was the big break in my career. I got a job with Meridian Oil Company here in Fort Worth that later became Burlington Resources. And stayed with that company for 18 years until it was bought out by ConocoPhillips in 2006. And then spent a year at Shell, which was miserable because you can't make any decisions at Shell without 5 levels of approval. Drove me crazy. So I got out of there quick as I could and went to El Paso Corporation, another independent producer. It was bought by Kinder Morgan in 2012. Did some consulting with FTI Consulting, which is a great consulting firm, and then it finished my career at Lynn Energy as their director of government affairs. So I was in government affairs for the last 25 years of my career, and communications, and so it was a great way to get a well-rounded view of the oil and gas business, So I really cherish those years and am happy with the way my career went.
Wow, well, I'm glad to hear you say that the independent has always been the best place for you to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know for us, we enjoy being an independent. We're proud at Pecos Country Operating and Pecos Country Energy to, say,
Right.
Hey, we're an independent and we're here and we're doing our best for the American people.
Exactly. At an independent, you have to push decision-making down in your organization, right? You just can't have people sitting around waiting for approvals. And at Shell, which is this enormous multinational, and I understand it all. Right. They have all these processes and approvals. for every decision that gets made, and it has to be that way. It was just frustrating for me.
Well, I know that for us, you're only as as tough as your weakest link. So we do our best to always get our guys in there, and you have to ask them what's going on, because you know what? Again, not only is you tough as your weakest link, but you're only smart as your non-smartest person, and you've got to just do the best that you can and then continue to go.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of news right now going on with the oil and gas industry just locally, here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area with the Barnett. The question is, are they going to ramp that up? Nationally, what are we doing about oil and gas here in America? And then globally, obviously, we got Russia, being a big bully over there in what they call Eastern Europe. Right now we're seeing these prices, only continue to go up. David, on election night 2020, we were under $35 a barrel, and today we've almost tripled in price.
Yep.
Do you see prices continuing to go up?
Yeah, I don't really see any prospect for anything else unless we have a global recession. That's really the only thing that could slow demand. The thing is that we have rising demand. We're already at pre-pandemic levels on oil demand. It's come back far more rapidly than any of our experts, predicted it would, which shouldn't surprise any of us in the industry that it's come back that way. And, we've had all these false promises about renewables taking away oil demand, electric vehicles displacing internal combustion engines and killing oil and gas demand, and that hasn't happened. Mm-hmm. And frankly, my belief is it's not going to happen in any real way for decades to come. And so our leaders globally were unprepared for this. And, we're not producing enough oil globally to meet demand right now. And then you have the situation with Russia and Ukraine, with the threat of additional sanctions on Putin and Russia for what looks to be an invasion of Ukraine as we speak. And, you take any part of Russia's 10 million barrels a day off the market, well, then that's just puts more upward pressure on price. So, yeah, it's got nowhere to go but up from here.
You mentioned Russia. I heard, and maybe you can confirm, that since this new administration has taken office, that our imports from Russia have only grown. Is that true?
Yes, Russia is the third largest oil exporter to the United States now. About 1 million barrels a day of our 22 million barrels per day consumption comes from Russia. And that's, I think, triple what it was actually on Election Day 2020, since we're using that as a benchmark.
Yeah.
Regular gas was selling at $2.11 on that day, and now I think it's $3.50 today, according to AAA. And again, that's going to be over $4 probably by April 1st. And I worry that we could be paying $5 or even $6 a gallon by the end of this year.
That would not be fun for anybody to be paying $5 or $6.
No, it hits the poorest the hardest, right? Because it's a regressive tax, and it takes a bigger bite out of their budgets than anyone else, and that's really sad.
Yeah, you talk about you mentioned the word tax, and that the other day somebody actually asked me. They go, "What is this giant tax in my natural gas bill?" And I said, "Well, that's the government tax." They don't understand that almost took up a third of their energy bill. At least that's what they told me. And but either way, I mean, that's still, let's just say it takes 10 or 12%. That's a pretty big tax on your natural gas or your heating bill at the end of every month.
Yeah, it is. And we have a gasoline tax that's the federal piece of it is 18.4 cents. Of course, that's used to at least partially fund the highway construction fund, which is woefully underfunded, and part of the reason we needed an infrastructure bill. So, taxes are a part of the equation for energy, but bad policy is a bigger part, right? Just regressive, stupid energy policies, not just in the U.S., but in Europe, as we've seen over this winter, and, trying to force an energy transition that market factors aren't really in favor of is a big piece of it. And efforts by ESG investor groups to defund the oil and gas industry are probably the biggest piece of our high energy prices today. So a lot of factors.
Well, you mentioned Europe, and obviously they got a lot going on over there right now. That Nord Stream 2 pipeline.
Yeah.
The Chancellor of Europe, I think, Chancellor, or not of Europe, excuse me, of Germany, Scholz, I believe that's
Olaf Scholz.
Olaf
Yes.
Scholz, yes. They just said that they're going to hold off on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline from Russia, since Russia is doing what they're doing by this
Right.
incursion or invasion, however you want to call it. You know, how is that going to affect them in Germany, Europe, and then would that also then spread to affecting us here in America?
Well, as luck would have it, I just wrote a piece about that this morning for Forbes. So yeah, everybody go click on it. No, it's a tough deal for Germany because they, again, going back to stupid energy policy. Over the last 15 years, they've made all these decisions policy-wise to try to shift their electric grid off of coal and natural gas, mainly off of coal, but also off of natural gas, to wind power, thinking that, oh my gosh, all these windmills can just displace all this, you know, these really dense, energy-dense sources of energy. And the wind stopped blowing in Europe over the summer. I don't know why. I don't understand it, but it did. And that's continued throughout the fall and winter. And so Germany and these other European countries who tried to force this transition through government policy have found themselves having to scramble desperately to obtain adequate natural gas supplies to keep the lights on and keep homes heated during the winter. And fortunately, the United States mainly, but also Qatar to a lesser extent, were able to increase exports of LNG to Europe dramatically, and at least temporarily have alleviated their issue. Now, Nord Stream 2 has already been built, you know, from the northern coast of Russia through the Bering Sea. Is it the Bering Sea? Yes. To Germany, and is designed to carry additional natural gas supplies into Europe. So Germany, you know, Chancellor Kohl says, yeah, he's going to hold that up, but their conundrum is, okay, so where do you get the natural gas to replace it?
Right.
Because they have to replace it, they have to have it. The wind's still not blowing, and it's not, you know, you can't really do what they wanted to do anyway, just from just a standpoint of thermodynamics and physics. But, you know, U.S. LNG, if allowed to continue to expand by our government here in the United States, can fill a big part of that void. We can do that from the United States, but it's much more expensive to ship gas overseas than it is to bring it through a 500-mile pipeline. But the Biden administration at the same time is doing everything it can to slow our industry down here in the United States, right?
Correct.
As part of its own environmental policy. So my view is that makes us an unreliable supply partner for Germany and Europe.
Yeah.
Right? As long as this presidency continues, which is at least another 3 years. So I don't know. Germany's got a tough situation, and what we see is Putin is holding all the cards in terms of geopolitics, and it's all driven by energy, by his oil and natural gas supplies.
Now, some people have said that when we had our real big shale boom here in the United States, that may have woken up, and I'll be polite, President Putin of Russia, to realize that we do hold such a great, you know, vast amount of natural gas, but also that we can be the number one, you know, provider of shale, you know, oil and natural gas in the world. And that's part of the reason why he's doing this right now, because he sees that we are not as energy strong as we've been in the past,
Right.
and that he is, again, like you said, holding the cards. You know, have you heard anything like that?
Oh, I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, when you talk to somebody like Dan Yergin and read his book, the new book, what's it called, The New Map.
The new map, yes.
And he talks about all of this, right? It's no accident that Putin is doing this now with a Democrat in the presidency and didn't do it when Donald Trump. Right. It's no accident that he took Crimea in 2015 when another Democrat was in office before Trump was elected. But the 4 years of a Trump presidency, Putin didn't do any of this.
No.
None of this happened. And so yeah, it revolves around geopolitics and Putin's calculation of whether or not he has the advantage. And right now he has the advantage very clearly.
Well, keeping it with the shale game, you know, obviously we have the Barnett Shale all here in North Texas, and that was such a real big producer in the early 2000s, right? You know, I know for me and my company at Pecos Country Energy and Pecos Country Operating, we're going to focus heavily over the next several years here in the great state of Texas, continuing to produce, and so are many other oil and gas companies. I mean, it's not just us. Yeah. Do you, and obviously the rig count is going up. Do you see that, you know, even with the restraints that we have today, Texas continuing to be or will be a leader moving forward?
Yeah, and in Texas, what we have is a situation where the resource is so immense and so economic to drill and produce, much more economic in the Permian Basin, say, than in the Bakken Shale or North Dakota or the DJ Basin in Colorado. We're so rich in resources that gives our industry an ability to continue to grow. Even in the face of a very onerous regulatory environment that we face right now from Washington. But is that sustainable over a long term? I don't know. I mean, I think we'll be able to continue to grow over the next 3 years, regardless of what Biden does, unless he resorts to the same kind of measures that Prime Minister Trudeau is employing in Canada right now, declaring a national emergency and assuming all these dictatorial powers, which, I mean, theoretically, an American president has some authority to do things like that, though it would be extremely controversial. But as long as we don't get to that point, I think, yeah, the industry will grow in the United States, mainly in Texas, because our state government is focused on ensuring that the industry is able to do its business here. But when you go to states like California or New York or you know, on the Northeast coast, it's all getting pulled back very quickly and dramatically, and that's terrible for the rest of the country. It's terrible for the consumers up there in those parts of the world and parts of the country, and it's bad for the country as a whole to become, because it impacts our level of energy security in a very negative way.
Well, you know, you talk about how it can hurt, but at that point, you know, I do like to say that, hey, we were energy dependent before this new administration took office. You know, sometimes I've read in your work that, hey, we weren't 100% energy independent.
No.
Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Right. And so where do you think we could go? Because you mentioned a few minutes ago that, hey, Russia's importing a million BOEs a day into the United States. You know, what kind of economic impact would us just adding another million barrels of oil a day in the great state of Texas do for us?
Well, I mean, it could help displace a lot of those imports, right? And the reality is, I've written a lot about the fact that we've never really been energy independent. And by that, I mean that for over half a century, we've not been able to supply all of our domestic consumption of oil with production of oil from the United States. When you combine our crude oil production with our condensate and natural gas liquids production volumes in the United States, we're still about 6 million barrels a day short of being independent of feeding all of our domestic needs.
Right.
But we can be much more energy secure than we currently are.
Yes.
There's no reason why we have to import barrels of oil from Russia or from the Middle East for that matter. We could easily, you know, it would take some time to renegotiate contracts in the refining business, but we could be importing all of our imports from Canada and Mexico and Brazil and, you know, other South American countries in the Western Hemisphere. So that if we did that, we'd be far more energy secure than we are today, and probably have lower costs for our own energy consumption here in the United States because of the shorter shipping routes and lower transportation costs you would have. So there are things we can do to become much more energy secure than we are today, but no, we're not technically energy independent and weren't even during the Trump years.
Right. You talk about the 6 million barrels a day. That's the difference. I bet here in Texas, we would love the opportunity to go ahead and just, turn that spigot on and get people back to work. I know from where I sit, we still don't see the companies doing the mass hiring that we were doing in 2009 and 10 when oil was creeping back up to the highs that we had in 12 and 13 and 14. And it's like, it's just such a shame that we're not back there. It's almost like we're playing jump rope, and we haven't jumped into it yet. Do you think the administration, would they be able to do something? I know that they're still fighting certain things. I mean, do they not know that, them along with all the climate change individuals, that it's like, it's also, would you say that they are helping the price of oil continue to go up?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's two things about this.
Yeah.
The first is the administration. They're completely beholden to the radical climate change lobby.
Right.
Okay? That's who funds their political campaigns. The cancellation of Keystone XL was simply political payback for $500 billion in campaign funding that came in from that part of activism. So they're beholden to that. They filled their administration up with former activists from the NRDC and the Sierra Club and Earth First and all these radical organizations. That's who's at the EPA now.
Mm-hmm.
It's who's at the Department of Interior now. It's who they're trying to get put on the Federal Reserve Board right now.
Oh, wow.
When you look at the nominees Biden has made to the Federal Reserve, they're radical climate alarm activists. And so that's what this administration is. So there's not going to be any relief from the Biden administration. We have 3 more years of this continued withering attack from regulators at the federal level. But the other piece of what you're talking about is it has come from the ESG investor world, right? Firms like BlackRock and these other big ESG-focused investors. ESG meaning environmental, social, and governance, mainly environmental. And so they're also a bunch of environmentalist activists running big investment firms, control trillions of dollars in capital. And over the last 10 years, they have worked very hard to marginalize investments in oil and gas.
Correct.
And to deny our industry capital needed to fund big projects. And so that has created a situation. I said earlier, we're very short of global supply of oil. Mm-hmm. Well, the reason why is we haven't invested enough in finding new reserves.
Correct.
And the main reason that's been the case is because of these ESG investor groups denying funding to the industry to do that. So that's why prices have nowhere to go but up, because the supply crunch is only going to continue to grow worse. Mm-hmm. And the Biden administration's a big part of that, because they're not going to take the reins off our domestic industry. I think our domestic industry increased production by 2 million barrels of oil in 2017 alone, right? In one 12-month period, 2 million barrels a day from our domestic industry. Well, what would happen to global prices if we did that in the next 12 years here in the United States? The price would go back down a little bit, not to 40, but maybe to 60 or 70. But this administration and these ESG investor groups aren't going to allow that. And so that's the situation, and the politicians rely on the ignorance of the public in order to be able to get away with that, right? They don't talk about these things. It's up to guys like you and me are the only people who are honest about it.
Right.
Our news media is completely ignoring that reality. And so the public, by and large, doesn't understand this, and so they think they can get away with it and still win some elections down the road.
Who would have known, that, with the way the energy is right now, it is such a big political thing right now. And that because of the decisions, it's really affecting what happens down the line.
Yeah, it really is. And, I think the one thing the politicians can't get away with, and I think it's really going to play itself out in this midterm election, is the high gasoline prices. Gasoline is the only source of energy we have that posts its price on gigantic signs right next to the streets we all drive down, right? And we see it, we experience it in our pocketbooks every time we fill our car up with gasoline at the pump. And so that issue alone, which Biden gives a lot of lip service to from time to time, but never does anything about because he can't. And he doesn't want to. That's the other thing we have to understand about today's Democrats is they want these high gas prices because it makes electric vehicles and renewables more competitive in the marketplace. And so this is not a glitch in their energy environment policy. It's a feature of electing Democrats to office. And I know there will be many Democrats watching and listening to this who will get angry when I say that, but it's the truth. And it's the truth that the politicians don't dare say in their own campaign.
When you say those things, that two things come to my mind. And first one is, I voted for a man that was going to keep prices low in 2020.
Yep.
Was that the smart move on my part, being in the oil and gas industry and producing?
And so that's the question, right? Yeah.
And,
you're able to make more money with these high prices, but the danger for the industry is that these high prices linger for a long enough period of time so that they really do start to kill demand for the product, right?
Absolutely.
And in the long term, it's not good for it.
Now, when you talk about the long term, let's say, we're probably going to see, based on our conversation a few minutes ago, we're probably going to see $100 oil here this year.
Maybe this week.
I was about to say it could be very soon. $100 oil is going to start really making people affect what they do, where they go, things like that.
Yeah.
The other thing is, though, if we hit $120 oil, that is going to shut people down.
Yeah.
And, so from a consumer standpoint, I don't want that on anybody. Mm-hmm. Now, the other side of the coin is, today oil's at give or take $92. Give or take. And, for those of y'all that don't know, a barrel of oil consists of 42 gallons. So really, a gallon of oil right now is $2.19. A gallon of milk is $3.29. I took a look. Unofficial shout out. I was at Ep, so unofficial shout out there. So when you break it down from that standpoint, that still costs less than it does at the pump. But of course, we do have to refine it. So work does go into play. So I don't want to say that's why, why are we not paying $2.19? Because we do got a lot of work to do. But with these things that are in place right now, do you really think that, we might be seeing this $100 oil? You mentioned this week, with everything going on globally, you think, or?
Yeah, I think even without the situation with Russia and Ukraine, I predicted in January we would have $100 prices by the 1st of April. It really does look like it's probably going to be before the 1st of March, because I think there's an extra $5 to $10 premium because of the Russia-Ukraine situation on oil prices. But if Russia does do a full invasion and the United States and Europe and the UN try to put sanctions on Russia that include, trying to deny them access to international markets for their oil and takes millions of barrels a day of their supply out of the equation, $100 could become the floor price for oil, and you could be at 150. I really do think we'll be at 120 in the summer because, just because of factors that happen every year. Summer driving season, refiners in late March and early April are going to have to switch over to making, from 5 or 6 winter blends of gasoline to 60 or 70 summer blends, for the EPA required haze program. And that increases costs, and then summer driving season increases the price of gas every year. And so I just think we're gonna see much higher prices as the year goes on. And yeah, you're right. The negative consequences to the economy from that hit everybody, and hit the industry, the oil and gas industry, as much as anyone else. And so we don't want to see prices that high. What do you think? I've always said $65, $70 oil price is right where the industry ought to be, would be really the ideal price for the domestic U.S. industry, because everybody could make money and you could drill wells and, and people would remain employed and people could afford the gasoline. I mean,
That's correct. I know for us, our break even at Pecos, we do our best to stay between $42 and $48 a barrel. And that's usually where we do our best to try to stay at our break even. Right now, with things the way they are, obviously we've kind of gone up on that. Yeah. And speaking of our break even and talking about it, from an investment standpoint, do you see now a good time to be investing in oil and gas, whether that's stocks or within a company? Just kind of do you see that as a thing?
Absolutely. And even BlackRock thinks so, right? Did you see what they said late last week? Because the state of Texas has this new law that says if you disadvantage the Texas oil and gas industry, you can't participate in our pension funds. Oh. So suddenly BlackRock writes this letter to the state of Texas saying, oh, we support oil and gas. We've always funded oil and gas. We're going to invest more in oil and gas. But yes, I mean, obviously it's the hot investment, right? It's the strongest performing sector the second half of 2021. And that's only going to be better in the first and second quarters of this year because of the commodity prices. But, even that has drawbacks because, again, it's all based on those higher commodity prices that you hope don't get too high.
Yeah. And at that point, you're going to have people that aren't going to be driving anywhere.
Right.
If we got to 120 at summertime, we may have a supply and demand issue of the other way where people aren't going to be going out. And then maybe price might come down a little bit, but like you stated earlier, right now we were not prepared to be at the production or at the need of the production that we're at right now.
Right.
Which is I think it's a blessing in disguise. People are tired of being cooped up in their houses, and people are ready to get back out and go do things again. After this 2 years of this whole COVID thing.
Yeah. I mean, we're actually going to take a little vacation in March. We took one in October of last year, and it was still, kind of uncomfortable with all the mask restrictions and everything. But now things have opened up to the point where I think people really are itching to travel, and you would hate to see energy prices put a real crimp in that.
Exactly, and that's the thing that I don't think anybody really wants to see is these prices cripple anybody or anything that people have planned. That's not the goal here by any means on anything.
Yeah.
Well, I will want to ask you a question, and it's going to be a tough one, but I got to get the crude truth on this. Do you see renewables and electric vehicles 100% replacing the fossil fuel industry?
No. That'll never happen. We've never had, first of all, we've had a series of energy transitions over the past century and a half, right? And when you look historically, first we went from burning wood to burning coal. And last year we burned more wood for heating homes and generating electricity across the globe than mankind has ever burned before. Okay. Yes, coal displaced a lot of wood, but it wasn't 100%. And then we were going to displace coal with oil and gas. And last year demand rose again for coal. I mean, it's not at record levels, but coal demand across the globe remains very substantial. So again, not 100% displacement. The thought that and those transitions were from a less energy dense source of energy. In other words, you have to burn more of it to generate the same amount of energy more wood than coal.
Right.
And you had to burn more coal than oil to generate the same amount of energy. Now you're talking about an energy transition from incredibly energy dense, the most energy dense resources we have, to unbelievably undense sources like wind and solar that have to be, these wind farms, these giant city of Taft in South Texas is surrounded by this massive wind farm, hundreds and hundreds of wind towers.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
2 natural gas wells would generate more energy than all those wind towers combined.
Wow.
For their lifetime, okay? 2 good natural gas wells. It just, you can't, it's it defies the laws of physics and thermodynamics to think you can do this, first of all.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time, what you just said?
Trying to displace energy-dense sources of energy like oil and gas with non-energy dense.
And it defies
the laws of thermodynamics and physics, the simple laws of physics. You can't do it. And you can't print enough. It doesn't matter how you can print all the money you want. I mean, this one group a couple of weeks ago that's for the transition said, well, you know, we estimate the cost over through 2050 of the transition is only going to be $131 trillion. $131 trillion. The total GDP of the whole world last year in 2021 was $85 trillion. You're talking about 150% of global GDP over the next 28 years. That's insane. You can't print that much money without completely collapsing the global economy. So that's a long way around to saying no, that we're not going to have 100% displacement, not by 2050, not ever. And what you're going to end up with, yes, I do think that wind and solar and EVs will continue to expand. Mm-hmm. But what so many of these studies you see don't account for is growth in population. Our population is going to be 10 billion people by 2050, maybe 11. Right now we're less than 8. And everyone who's born consumes energy.
Yep.
And every advancement in technology, the new versions of televisions consume a lot more energy than the 25-inch screens we watched in 1980. And every new iPhone consumes more energy than the previous one. And so we always fail to take growth into consideration. And so I think those renewables and EVs will continue to grow, but they probably won't grow fast enough even to account for the rate of growth in energy demand.
right.
And so, no, I mean, yeah, it's a great time to invest in the oil and gas business. It's going to be around a long time, going to grow for a long time. And there's nothing governments or ESG investors can really do to change that reality. At the end of the day, reality is what's going to determine how the energy mix transitions and to what extent it transitions in the decades ahead. And that's just the way it's going to be.
Well, I would say that was a pretty tough, crude truth right there, David. I tell you, I really appreciate the time today. You've been more than educational. I know that our listeners and our viewers really enjoy everything that you do. And I hope some people that aren't necessarily on our side have a good opportunity to listen to what you've had to say today. And
don't want to shoot me for saying it, right?
We'll take it with a grain of salt and maybe understand things a little bit differently. But I'm glad to also hear you're going to go on vacation here next month.
I need a break.
You need a break, David. Well, again, my guest today was David Blackmon. And I hope to have you on again real soon, and maybe we can talk about, see what's going on in the summertime.
Anytime.
Thank you, and we'll see you again. Bye-bye.
The easiest way to start your own podcast and TV show? Real News Communications Network. Stand out from your competition. Produce streams of high-quality social media content. Become a thought leader in your industry. With RNCN, you get to be the host. We handle everything else. Tour one of our 3 locations in Dallas, Fort Worth, and the Colony. Call 972-402-6333 or visit launchashow.com to find out more.